there are still people, people who are being displaced, people who've lost loved ones, people who go through real trauma. Now, I am not saying that you can't assess, if you will, politically or militarily what's happening here. I mean, to a certain extent, obviously Israel having, the rockets, like Hezbollah rockets put up at their border, that's obviously a threat. Like I would understand any nation that says, well, actually, I don't let myself be attacked for a year or so, just constantly while I'm gonna clear this thing up. I'm not saying that you can't make these judgments or that you can't form an opinion about these things. But I am saying that in terms of priority, we need to get this one right as Christians. It's at the end, there are people who are being affected by this. And not just people who are being affected by this, there are people who need reconciliation with God, man. There are people who need salvation, who need the peace of God, against the odds of everything that's happening. There are people who, man, so many times I've talked to our leaders and said, man, it is hard enough as a believer to go through this. And again, there's, it's sometimes scary, and you have the strikes, and you fear about your kids and what have you, and you have the drones over your head, and it's crazy. But at least, not at least, but as a Christian, you can say, man, I get to ask God to pour out the peace, His peace that surpasses my understanding. Like I've real hope that there's something beyond what's in my face. Now, as if you don't have that, and see how bad is that to experience something as cataclysmic and as traumatic as this? And so, really, this should be at the core of our stance or attitude towards what is happening here. As Christians, we should see, okay, there are people who are suffering, and there are people who Christ died for, and there are people who are in need of reconciliation with God. It doesn't matter on which side of the conflict they're standing, whether they're Israelis or Lebanese or Palestinians or Iranians. It just doesn't matter. For God, there's neither Greek nor Gentile. There's neither Jew nor Gentile. Like all have sinned, and all are in need of salvation. And I think that's at the core of how we should be looking at this. And again, I'm not saying that you can't form an opinion about what's happening, but I think forming an opinion should come after your commitment to seek, salvation and reconciliation for those who are lost.
Absolutely. And I think that is the message that needs to go out right now, because we see this very disturbing trend of extremist Christian Zionism, where when irrespective of what theological position that you hold, covenantal theology or anything that you hold with regards to dispensationalism or how the statehood of Israel plays out, and we all know the fact that the land was given to them through Abraham, and there was promise that they would return to the land, and that's all there. As Christians, we all affirm that. But sometimes we see this very disturbing fact that the lives lost in this conflict, be it Palestinian lives or Lebanese lives, are looked at and said, they deserved it. And it is certainly the case that there are evildoers in among that pile of dead bodies. It's certainly the case that militants and terrorists are there at the receiving end, but no one can deny the fact that no matter what stance you take on the death toll figures or whether they're reliable or not, no one can deny the fact that children and innocent civilians are getting caught in the crossfire. No one denies that. I don't think any nation or any international organization denies that. But oftentimes, driven by the zeal for the land of Israel, we see a lot of Christians, as you say, miss the mark, lose that priority completely out of the picture, where it comes to a point where it's this fervent desire to defend politicians. I mean, we all know that politicians are not always God-honoring men. We know that they're not always truthful, that they have so much of selfish desires. But this idea that Israeli politicians can never lie, or Israeli politicians are always the good guys, has led to a lot of Christians lose the big picture. And there is recurring chastisement of that sort of an idea in the Old Testament, all throughout. The King Ahab is one prime example. We never see anywhere in the Old Testament God just giving the kings of Israel a pass, or because they are in charge, or because they're Israelites, or because they're Jews or anything. Justice was served all throughout. And the book of Hosea, which was a real eye-opener to me when I was reading us, the Hosea is asking the Lord, I mean, yes, we made a mistakes, we erred in your ways, but you have brought the Babylonians upon us, and they're doing much further evil. So the gravity of God's judgment upon Israel and the Jewish land was very clear in Hosea's eyes. And we see this all throughout the Old Testament, Jeremiah the prophet, and in the Pentateuch as well, the reminder to not oppress the foreigner and the widow and the orphan, but to care for all. So the idea of this unbridled allegiance towards a nation state is out of touch with the Christian worldview. There is the ground biblical reality of God's promise to the people of Israel. But the idea that the state and the politicians must always be defended leads us to lose sight of where our true allegiance lies. And that is towards the Lamb who was slain, who has come down to redeem all of mankind. As you pointed out, every single one has been presented the opportunity to receive Christ. And I think that's a place where we have to remind ourselves on where our true allegiance lies. And I believe that is also a place where we can err in the global stage. When people wonder, how can Christians be so aloof in the face of this evil and suffering and turn a blind eye towards it?